So today we're diving into something a little different. We've got these excerpts, right, from this The Vision of War, Israel and Iran's Dark Future. Kind of grabs you with the title, doesn't it?
It does, yeah.
And it's written by this guy, Chucker Tarson. Now, Tarson, he claims he can see the future. Bit out there, I know.
Visions of the future.
Okay. And look, I get it. Sounds a bit far-fetched, but bear with me. Even though it's fiction, what Tarson does is he takes these very real tensions, between Israel and Iran.
Right.
And he spins them out, creates these what-if scenarios, almost like a military strategist might do, but in a fictional world.
Interesting. So a thought experiment of sorts.
Exactly. And sometimes those thought experiments, even if they are fictional, they can be really valuable.
I can see that.
So Tarson, he doesn't mess around. He jumps right into the action. And I mean right into it. He paints this incredibly vivid picture of Israeli drones, super advanced ones, carrying out these strikes on Iranian nuclear and military targets.
Okay.
And the way he describes it, he keeps using the words surgical yet devastating.
Surgical yet devastating. I mean, it's an interesting juxtaposition.
Right. And it really makes you think about, the role technology plays in all this, especially with drones being so prevalent these days.
Yeah.
What do you make of this opening move, this drone strike? Plausible?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Israel has been at the forefront of drone technology for decades. It's no secret. And these weapons, they offered this ability to hit targets that are, let's say, deep inside enemy territory while minimizing, at least in theory, civilian casualties. So from a strategic point of view, it makes sense.
Tarson really seems to hone in on that whole surgical aspect of it, almost like he's, emphasizing the precision.
I think that's a key point because it plays into that argument, that common argument we hear about drone warfare, that it's somehow cleaner, more precise, less messy than traditional warfare.
Right, less collateral damage.
Exactly. But as Tarson's own story will show us later on, the reality, as always, is much more complicated. Even the most precise weapon
can't always be so precise.
Exactly.
And that's where things escalate. Tarson even gives this section the title, A Spiral of Retaliation and Regional Inferno. He's not messing around with the titles, that's for sure. A regional inferno. Sounds intense.
It is. In Tarson's version of events, Iran doesn't just sit back.
Right.
They retaliate, and it's almost immediate. He describes Iranian missiles raining down on Israeli cities. Tel Aviv, Haifa, even Jerusalem isn't spared. And it just keeps spiraling. Hezbollah jumps in, launching rocket attacks from Lebanon. And before you know it, Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, they all get involved. And suddenly, it's not just Israel and Iran, it's the entire region.
Wow.
He paints this really stark picture of how quickly things could just explode, how interconnected everything is over there.
It's that volatility, isn't it? Always simmering beneath the surface.
Exactly. So from an expert standpoint, is Tarson exaggerating here, or is this rapid escalation, this regional inferno, as he calls it, is that something that, keeps you guys up at night? I think what he captures really well is that interconnectedness we were talking about.
Yeah.
The region is like a tinderbox. You have Hezbollah, they've got a massive stockpile of missiles, and their ties to Iran are well documented. And while Israel has the Iron Dome, it's not foolproof. Then you add Hamas, other Palestinian groups, each with their own objectives, and it gets very complicated very quickly. It's not just a war between two states anymore. It's multifaceted, unpredictable.
And it's not just the immediate players.
Yeah.
It's like Tarson, he pulls in like the whole neighborhood. It's he's got the Gulf states involved. He's talking Saudi Arabia, UAE, and they're kind of pulled in almost reluctantly because of Iran. I mean, given the history there, that tracks, doesn't it?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. You can't discount those rivalries that have been brewing for years in the Gulf, Saudi Arabia, UAE. Yeah. They might not be like card-carrying members of Israel's fan club or anything, but they do share some concerns when it comes to Iran, especially, with their ambitions, their nuclear program. It's a common enemy sort of thing, right?
Right. And let's not forget Tarson, he makes a big deal about this.
Yeah.
And it makes sense. He says they all share that, it's the Strait of Hormuz, right?
Exactly, yeah.
With Iran. And he makes it clear, any conflict, anything that spills over into those waters, that's a global problem, right? Yeah. Suddenly everyone's involved.
100%. I mean, you just have to think about it. The Strait of Hormuz, that's like the artery for global oil, right? Yeah. Even a hiccup, a temporary disruption, to the tankers going through there. And, The global economy could go haywire.
Yeah.
Prices would skyrocket. And it's not just gas prices at the pump. It's, everything. Transportation, manufacturing, it all relies on that flow of oil.
It's like a domino effect, right?
Exactly.
And speaking of dominoes, that's kind of how Tarson portrays the global fallout from all of this, right? It's not pretty. He talks about markets crashing, economies just tanking, and the supply chains we're also relying on, those are just shot.
Right.
And then he takes it even further, right? He's like, this isn't just contained to the Middle East. It's like
Yeah.
this instability. It starts spilling over to other regions, and before you know it, it's sparking new conflicts. Like, it's just chaos.
Yeah.
He even says, he uses this phrase, he's like, this localized war becomes a global earthquake. Is that hyperbole, do you think, or is that the kind of scale we should be like wrapping our heads around here?
I think his point is that, it's 2024. We're all connected. There are no real borders when it comes to conflict anymore.
No.
Remember that whole thing with the Suez Canal when that one ship got stuck?
Oh, yeah.
For a few days, global trade was crippled. I mean, delays, shortages, panic.
Right.
Now multiply that by, I don't know, 1,000, 10,000. That's what we're talking about if a conflict like this were to escalate. And it's not even just the economic impact.
Yeah.
You're talking political instability, social unrest, and the possibility of things spiraling even further out of control. It's like, imagine you start pulling on one thread and the whole thing unravels,
Yeah. It's a lot, and it's scary, frankly. But you know what, Tarson, he's not done. In the middle of all this, like this regional chaos, the global meltdown, he throws in another curveball.
Yeah.
And it's a big one. He introduces the possibility of nuclear war.
Right. It's the elephant in the room, isn't it, when you're talking about a conflict like this?
He describes this standoff between Israel and Iran, and it's so tense. They're like, both sides are signaling, right? But they keep getting closer to the edge, like they're both walking a tightrope, and one wrong step.
Yeah.
Boom. You can just feel the tension in his writing.
Yeah. And that tension, it's not just in the story, it's real.
Yeah.
It's that whole idea of the nuclear threshold, that point of no return. It's a dilemma, a real world dilemma. I mean, no leader takes that decision lightly, right?
Yeah.
But in a situation like this where survival is on the line, who knows what could happen? It's a scary thought.
He really makes it clear in the book that neither side wants to go there.
Right.
Right. They don't want to be the one to push the button.
Yeah.
But they just keep getting closer and closer, like it's inevitable,
It's like a car crash in slow motion, and you can see it coming, but
Yeah.
you can't look away. And the worst part, it's that human element, the pressure on those leaders, the weight of knowing that they hold so much in their hands. That's where the real danger lies. That's when miscalculation, misjudgment, those things become very, very real.
And Tarson, he goes there. In his story, he has Israel making that decision, launching what he calls a limited nuclear strike on Iranian military targets. Yeah. It's framed as a last resort, a desperate attempt to prevent a larger attack.
Right.
But even so, even a limited nuclear strike, I mean, the consequences are unimaginable.
Unimaginable. And that's the thing, even with all our technology, our intelligence, you cannot control a nuclear weapon.
Even though he calls it limited, Tarson doesn't sugarcoat the aftermath. It's horrific. What gets me, though, is that even after all that, even after a nuclear strike, there's no clear winner. It's like,
that's the tragedy of it all, isn't it?
Yeah.
This illusion of control, that you can somehow contain the fire, but the reality is even a limited nuclear exchange. I mean, we're talking about consequences that are unimaginable, not just for, Israel, Iran, but for everyone.
And that's what he calls a bleak peace.
Mm-hmm.
What does that even look like in Tarson's vision? This bleak peace.
Well, it's not really peace as we'd like to think of it. It's more like a region that's been, scarred.
Scarred.
Yeah, physically, emotionally. Tarson, he describes these broken economies, cities in ruins. The whole political landscape is it's shattered.
Well,
and the Middle East, he describes, it's a place wrestling with radiation, environmental damage, millions displaced. It's not a pretty picture.
and it's easy to forget about all that, the long-term stuff.
Yeah.
When you're focused on the immediate crisis.
Absolutely. The fighting might stop, but the suffering, that continues. Tarson, he really drives that home. He talks about families torn apart, survivors dealing with the trauma, the loss. And then there are the kids, right? Whole generations left to rebuild in a world that's been, forever changed by this.
And the rest of the world, they're not just like watching this on TV, or What happens outside the Middle East in this bleak future?
Well, nobody gets off scot-free, that's for sure. Tarson, he paints this picture of a global economy that's just in shambles. Political alliances, they're all scrambled up, and there's this undercurrent of fear, of distrust. It's like once you cross that line, that nuclear line, the world's never the same.
It's not just the bombs themselves. It's what it represents. It changes everything.
Exactly. The rules, the norms, the very idea of what's acceptable, it's all out the window. And that's terrifying in its own right.
Okay. So big picture here. We've covered a lot, and it's heavy stuff. But, I mean, this is fiction, right? So what do we take away from this? What's the message? Why read this at all?
I think it's a warning, but it's not meant to paralyze us,
Right.
It's more like Tarson is saying, look, this is the path we're on. These tensions, this potential for things to spiral out of control, it's real. But by showing us this dark possibility, he's also saying, hey, we have a choice. We can choose a different path.
So what is that path? How do we even begin to do that?
For me, if there's a hopeful thread in all of this, it's that Tarson keeps coming back to dialogue. Yeah. He seems to be saying that even when things seem impossible, when both sides are backed into a corner, talking, trying to understand each other, that's the only way out. It's that glimmer of hope, even in the darkest corners of his story.
It's like a reminder that we're not just along for the ride. The future isn't like preordained. We have agency.
100%.
And it's not about, pretending the danger isn't there. It's about acknowledging it, understanding it, and then actively working towards a better outcome. That's what we can control.
Well said. And maybe that's the most important thing we can take away from all of this, from this fictional deep dive, that even in the face of, potential disaster, hope matters.
Hope and action.
Exactly.
Well, this has been a lot to process. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us. It's been a journey.
My pleasure.
And for everyone listening, thanks for joining us. Keep asking the tough questions. We'll see you next time.